Hi, and welcome to Seatton Education. I'm your host, Victoria. Every week, we talk to expert guests from around the world to show that home education really can be an achievable alternative to conventional schooling. Joining me today is the founder of Our Life Homeschooling, Sheri Renno. She shares insights into her daily life as a homeschooling mum of 10 through her blog and YouTube channel. Hi, thanks so much for being here today.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Can you start by letting us know why you started to homeschool? What possibly prompted you? You're a former teacher into making this
Yes.
decision.
Yes, I had been a public school teacher, and when our oldest son was about 4 or 5, we started realizing this was coming up on us, and we had some decisions to make. And at the time, my husband was working a random schedule, so that really affected um, our decision to homeschool him, because if he would have been in school, he wouldn't have seen him for most of the week. So that had a huge effect on us. And with us homeschooling, he was allowed to, we could kind of flex our schedule around my husband's schedule, and it was just great for our family life. So that was initially our decision, that influenced our decision. But then, the more we started doing it, initially I printed out all the public school objectives. I wanted to check every box and make sure that we were on grade level. And what I quickly realized was that my son was going way ahead in some areas, and in other areas, I really, it was something that wasn't important to me. I had other things I wanted to focus on that I thought were part of an education that weren't there, or there were some areas that he was struggling in, and I didn't want to just keep moving. I wanted to be able to stop and help him get through those. And we started to see that it's not a one size fits all curriculum when you're working with individuals. My son was an individual. He's an individual. And so that kind of a system, I started to see how subpar it is. It's not the gold standard.
Mm.
And we wanted to give our kids a Christian education. And I think our view on education just broadened. It became smaller as far as more individualized, and larger as far as we have the whole world. We're not limited to the public education standards.
Mm. We all, as parents, have our own worldview, whatever that might be. And of course, that is not catered to in the school system because it's the state or the government or the private school board or whoever it might be. Obviously, they
Right.
have a view for what is the overarching philosophy behind that education. Whereas when you're homeschooling, as the parents, you get to choose what that overarching philosophy and mindset is and worldview, I suppose.
Yes. Yes. And that became more and more important to us. We want to teach them the things that are important to us. We want to pass those down to them, and giving them a Christian education is a priority.
Well, maybe you could introduce us to how many children you have and what their ages are, because there are going to be questions that you can answer so well for people who might just be starting out and thinking, well, I don't know how I'll handle homeschooling at this age or when I have young children, but you've really done it all, Sheri.
My husband and I have 10 kids. Our oldest is 20. I'm sorry, he's almost 20. He'll be turning 20 soon. And our youngest is 21 months, so almost 2. So there's a pretty wide range there. And this is our 15th year of homeschooling. I started the blog and YouTube channel back in 2020. I kind of got more serious about it in 2022. At that point, we had been homeschooling for over 10 years. Some things were getting easier. The first 5 years, at least, 5 to 10 years, was so much foundational work. It took so much more of my time. There was a huge learning curve. I had not been homeschooled, even though I had been in the public school system and had taught. It was a completely different thing to teach your own children at home. So that was a huge learning curve, but it became easier. And I did have a little bit more free time, and I wanted to find a way to encourage other moms, other families that were starting out homeschooling and were kind of in the same place that I was several years ago when I started.
Mm. And when you talk about homeschool, what age do you start your students, your children, in sort of more formal sit-down education? And the sort of second part of that question, I suppose, is what does preschool mean to you in the homeschool setting?
I don't look at initially, we're supposed to start formally when they're 5 years old here in the States and enroll them in a kindergarten program. But I don't really do anything very formal until I know that they're ready. So when I noticed that our son, William, is our most recent reader, when he was 5, he naturally did start getting interested in things. And I could see him looking through books, pretending to read. And so to me, that is just, he was right. When they start pretending to read, they're just ready to go. And so that's when I jump in and I'm ready to start lessons with him. But if they have no interest, if they're playing, if it's so much work for them, they just might not be developmentally ready. And I think there's a huge push in our culture in general to get our kids into a preschool program from a very young age. And I've also have a little bit of experience working in a preschool in addition to my public school experience. And I can say that the home is so much better than a preschool environment. In fact, they try to make the preschool replicate all the things that you find in a home, raw materials, just the different play areas that they have, the different routines that they have. Um, it's trying to replicate all the best things of a home. And I think that home has so much more to offer our kids. The free time, spending time outside. So there's about 5 things that I try to make sure my preschoolers get as part of their homeschool day. One is some kind of work time. And for this is very simple. When our kids are probably about 3 years old, I have 3 things: get dressed, make your bed, and brush your teeth. Just helping them understand the very basics of taking care of themselves, taking care of their surroundings. So we just work on that. Get dressed, make your bed, brush your teeth. And that gives them something to do, gives them a project, something to tackle. And then another thing is outside time. Kids learn the best when they're outside. Their senses are the most alert: sense of smell, touch, taste. And Charlotte Mason talks so much about this. And she is just someone that's so admired here by so many homeschoolers because although she lived over 100 years ago, what she has to say is so fitting. She was beyond her years, and her understanding of how children learn is just very developmentally appropriate for young children. So she talked about outside time. Another thing that we do, a third thing, is read aloud. We read aloud to our kids throughout the day, and not in large sections of time. It's short. It'll be a little bit in the morning, a little bit after lunch, a little bit before bedtime, and maybe a read aloud during the day. Just little sections of reading to them. A fourth thing is just some quiet time to themselves. Some of them still nap, or if they don't nap every day, maybe every other day. So giving them just some quiet time in their rooms with some books or some toys to just play, that just helps them foster their imagination. And then the last thing is lots of free time. Play is when preschoolers are learning. That is their education when they're that age. And it's so important for them to, it builds their minds, it builds their thinking skills, problem-solving skills are learned in free play. So we try to make those things important in our home when our kids are little.
And as you say, they are all the areas that if you go into any preschool, or we call them nursery in the UK, that's exactly the environment they're trying to replicate. And in the
Yes.
UK at the moment, there's a very strong push to get all parents back into work. And so state-funded childcare has come down and down the age at which your child can go to childcare. And so now most families in the UK, early years education, part funded by the state from 9 months of age.
Oh,
And
wow.
it is so young. There is no research to suggest that children do better off outside of the home, away from parents at that young age.
Yes.
And it makes me really sad because I think when the government has put that in place, parents think it's the right thing. They think, well, this must be research backed. This must be the right
Right.
thing for my child. So I know people who don't need to send their child into childcare who are doing it because they think it's the right thing to do for their child. And yet actually those points you've just picked up on, you can create those amazing opportunities for young children to grow and develop so much better and so perfectly at home.
At home. Mhm.
And Charlotte Mason, for people who don't know, she was a British educator in the Victorian era here in England, in the north of England. And as you say, she picks up so much on those ideas of being in nature, she was in the beautiful Lake District, so it's very easy to be inspired by nature when you're surrounded by that. But it's so true that those points that you've raised, I think sometimes people struggle about how can I give my child the same opportunities that they would get from a professional. And actually
Right.
those things are so rich when you can give those in a loving home environment.
Yes. Yes.
I,
And not to mention just that relationship with a
mm,
parent. Kids, there's a quote, kids are made readers on the laps of their parents.
I
And
love that.
just that time, um, kids are more apt to learn when they're in an environment that feels safe,
Mm.
that is stimulating. And where do they feel safer? Where do they feel most content? But at home. Home is a
Mm.
wonderful place for young children to learn and grow.
That's such a good point that you make, because I think we all know about fight or flight. When you're in a situation where you're scared, your mind is not thinking, oh, well, what can I learn new today? You're thinking
Right.
about survival a lot of the time, or a mainstream school setting. You're not thinking about even enjoying the subject. You're just thinking about, in many cases, getting through the day. And I would argue even people who do well in a school setting still are thinking about those things. They're thinking, I remember it, I was at school, how will everybody judge the new shoes I'm wearing? Are they the right brand? Are
Right.
they? And those things take up the best part of your mental capacity. You're not thinking about some beautiful painting that you're looking at and how that might relate to the book
Exactly.
you're reading.
Yes. And I think for that reason, sometimes people look at kids that are homeschooled, and because they're not worried about what clothes they're wearing or what name brands, they're not worried about those things. I think that it comes a little bit later for them.
Hmm.
And in that way, I think it's a great socialization because they're able to have their childhood a little bit longer, and they're able to learn so much more. They do hit a point when they get a little bit older and they start to finally see those things, but it doesn't come so early. It
Hmm.
doesn't come so young. They can still have a childhood and still learn without all those hindrances.
And you're hoping that if they've been in this loving, nurturing home environment, by the time they do become aware of that, they're that much more emotionally mature to deal with those things.
Yes.
It's a
Mhm.
lot to deal with when you're a preteen of 11 or 12, and you really
Oh,
just
it
don't have that
is.
emotional maturity yet, I think.
Right. Yes. Yes,
And
I
I
agree.
think I heard you mention in one of your videos that I think you'd had a toddler for 19 years or something, which is a really long time. And I'm sure that parents
Yes.
who have fewer children, who might have one toddler at the moment, I have had people say to me, there's no way I could homeschool because I can't even cope with my 2-year-old. So, can you just speak to how you homeschool when you have babies and toddlers underfoot? How do you manage that, getting the older children through more formal school and having those younger ones around as well?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to help your kids become independent learners. And as soon as they can read. This was a foreign concept to me. When we first started homeschooling our oldest son, I taught every lesson. Growing up in the school setting, that was, to me, the only way you can learn. You have to have a teacher teach you every single thing. And so when I thought about helping him move toward independence, it just seemed like it wasn't responsible. Until I started watching him when we got to we had 3 kids, and I could no longer teach 3 math lessons. And still, I'm sorry, when we had 4 kids, so 3 in school, and then I had a toddler, I could no longer teach 3 individual math lessons. I had to move toward independent, something that they could do more on their own. And what I learned was they actually were more motivated when I was more of a facilitator. I still help them when they come to new concepts. I still sit down and spend whatever time is needed to teach them the initial concept, but the practice, they can start doing more and more independently. So I'm always working with the child who is the budding reader. So first, get them to read, first of all. We try to do a little reading, writing, and math every day with whoever is at that age where they're beginning all of that. And then once they get proficient at that, I move them toward independence, because that also helps them take ownership of their work. And when kids are interested in something, they learn more. And I have seen that so many more times, whereas when we're just trying to fill their heads with knowledge, we may be doing a lot of work, we may be spending a lot of time, but I've observed from my kids, they're not remembering as much. They're not as interested. So when they can take ownership of it, it really helps. With having young children around, it is tricky. I think one thing you have on your side when you're homeschooling is that it takes much less time. I think typically homeschoolers spend anywhere from about 2 to 4 hours a day in formal academic work. So that would be more for high schoolers. It'd probably be closer to 4 hours, but it takes much less time. And that's an advantage you have when you have young children. So we include housework as part of our school day. It's not part of the academic part of our day, but we have time for other things, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And I do try to prioritize my little ones, just including them in what we're doing, making them feel a part of it. I have written out, one thing that helped me one day was to just make a list of all the things that might entertain them. So puzzles, Play-Doh, any kind of raw materials, blocks, and to just have that handy while I'm sitting listening to a reading lesson. So those are just some ideas. And I think the biggest thing is just keeping perspective. I knew from the beginning, it didn't take me long to see that this was such an excellent education. And I did have something to compare it to, having been in the public school system. I knew how good it was. And so even though I had a lot of those setbacks, I have been interrupted. I'm interrupted constantly by needs. That's a part of our day. But I have tried to keep that perspective. I know my kids are getting an excellent education. So we adjusted and we tried to make it work. Sometimes if the toddler was just, just unhappy or really needed my attention and didn't want to sit and play, I would put our lessons aside and I would wait till nap time. And I'd put the baby down for nap time, and that would be the 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever I needed that I could sit down one-on-one with my kids and get some schoolwork done just with the quiet. And I think that's another thing that we underestimate is how much more you can get done when you're working one-on-one with a child.
Yeah.
It doesn't take 8 hours when you're sitting down. It's like when you homeschool, you have a private tutor for each of your kids. And that tutor is you, and you are following them. It's not even the same. It's even better than a private tutor, because a tutor may only have them for, for a year, and then maybe you move on to someone else. But if you have someone that has consistently been there and knows all of their prior
Yeah.
knowledge and where they've been, you can just take them further
Yeah.
more quickly.
And you know their personality, you know their learning style. You don't have to.
Yes.
I feel like with tutors, often there's an onboarding period where they're just trying to get to know
Right.
how the child learns. And I think you're so right that if you know, just you inherently know that person better
Yeah.
than anyone else in their life, so you're really well placed to hit the ground running. And you know, one child might really love learning lists of things, and then another child you're going to have to put pictures with that, or they have different
Right.
styles.
Right. So
And
true.
I think as well, some people have said to me, I couldn't do it because I'm human. You know, there are going to be days when I'm sick. In your case, there's been lots of times when you've been pregnant,
Yes.
and that is exhausting, or you might feel ill during that period or that season of life. How have you coped through those chapters?
It haven't been easy, that's for sure. I think one of the biggest things for me is just relying on the Lord and going to God's word and keeping that perspective. I know this is what God's called us to do. And I'm so thankful for this opportunity that we can do this. So just keeping the perspective of why you're doing what you're doing. And again, just the fact that homeschooling takes a lot less time it is such an advantage. So I did take naps when my kids were all young and I was homeschooling. It was kind of the running joke when some of my kids hit like the ages, my oldest one's between 10 and 12, whenever we would finish our afternoon read aloud time, mom would always fall asleep. I would be reading and I would be getting to the end of the chapter. And sometimes I worried, I'm pregnant, I'm tired. I don't think I'm doing as much, but in the end, I think overall it's just such a great choice and such a great environment for kids. My kids, I'm very happy with their education. I think they're fine. And I just keeping that overall perspective of why you're doing what you're doing and being willing to make some of those small sacrifices.
Mm. And I think to highlight that idea of keeping your why so central is really important. And I speak to a lot of people about home education, and everyone who I speak to is really intentional about it. You don't
Yes.
stumble into this. This is
No.
countercultural. And I think if that is the case for any decision in your life, there will be some really strong driving reason as to why you're doing it. And I always talk about just encouraging you to put whatever it is for you, that driving purpose, that North
Yeah.
Star, front and center.
Sometimes when you're in the thick of it with some of the difficulties and the challenges, you forget the big picture. So having someone in your life, having good friends, I think is so important because,
Mm.
no one's an island, and you just need that support.
I have to thank you again for the work that you're doing on your channel, because I think sometimes it can feel really daunting when people don't know that many other people who are homeschooling. And
Yeah.
honestly, what you do is so great because it's such an honest look into. You're so gracious that you let us into your home and your
Oh,
family,
thank you.
because it's just it feels like we know you and we know your family because you're showing us what it looks like. And I think sometimes
Mm,
taking away that fear factor of just seeing other
yes.
people do this. I always use the analogy of birth. 200 years ago, most women would have seen several births by the time they had their first child. They would have
Mm,
attended their aunt's birth or their mother's or younger siblings,
right.
older siblings. Whereas now, many, many people have never, ever witnessed a childbirth before their own birth. And I think that gives people such
Yes.
terror and fear.
Mm,
Um, and it's a little bit like homeschooling, that it seems such a huge mountain to climb when you think, I've never seen anyone do this. What does it look like? And really, that was so much part of our goal with, setting up my channel, that I wanted to interview people to say, look, there are people who've been there. They're doing it. They are
Yes.
real people. They're going through
Yes.
this.
And it's going very well. I think that's another thing. I kind of had a similar experience when I was teaching in the public school system. I had a student come into my classroom that had been homeschooled. I think his mom had just had her sixth baby. She probably felt very alone and put them in school because she did at that time. I mean, that was 20 years ago. So there was very little support for homeschoolers back then. And this student, I mean, he just amazed me from the start. I mean, not only he was by far grade levels ahead of my other kids. So academically, he was doing so well. I would hand out a worksheet and it would take the rest of the class 15 minutes to do it. He'd be done in 5 minutes and he'd be back in the back of the room reading books that were way above his grade level. But not only did he excel academically, he was a leader in the class. He changed the whole atmosphere of our classroom. He was just well-adjusted. He was self-confident, positive, fun, and had interesting conversations, was curious. And it was like the light hadn't been snuffed out of him. And I think back to that mom. I don't know what she ever did. She probably felt very overwhelmed at that season of her life, but had no idea what a great job she had been doing with her kids.
Wow, that's a great testament to her efforts, even at a moment of maybe worrying she wasn't doing the best. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
In terms of, you've talked a bit about how you balance cooking and homemaking. You said that you had chores for the whole family. When all the children are little and, before they're particularly helpful, although a lot of toddlers do think they are quite helpful with household chores, but before you think they're helpful, how do you balance just the everyday keeping a household together and homeschooling?
Yeah, I think one thing I always tried to do when I could was to double my meals. Whenever I would make a dish, I always tried to make more than would feed for one time, so then we could just have some leftovers the next day. Um, and maybe aside from that, we had simple meals, something that you could just throw together easily. And as my kids have gotten older, it has gotten easier. I do have a little bit more time to spend making meals. But I also think when they were young, I don't always know how it worked out. Maybe because when they were younger, we didn't spend 4 hours a day. We spent 2 hours. They were kind of at that stage. And so I had a little bit more free time. But yeah, just including them in it is definitely harder. Now that they're older, I am so glad I included my kids in the kitchen because they are proficient. I mean, they like to cook, which is great. And they can cook. They've been here. They're here for 3 meals a day when we're here. We're not always here. We go out a lot. But when we're here, they see all that happens. And they can sometimes just make a dish that I normally make because they've seen it so many times. So
you've talked us through so generously your sort of typical quote unquote days, that kind of idea of how long you're spending at different stages of school, but can you just paint us a picture of where in your home you homeschool? Because you have a lot of children, and I think sometimes people say, oh, I don't have the space to homeschool. I don't have a classroom in my house. Where do you do it?
We homeschool throughout our house. We don't have a specific room that is our homeschool room. Learning happens everywhere. It happens outside. A lot of times I'll look out on our front porch swing and my daughter will be reading her book out there and or someone will be sitting on the deck outside. And learning doesn't happen in special learning spaces. It really happens everywhere. It happens when we're out going different places and running different errands around town. So we don't limit our homeschool. We don't have a homeschool room. It kind of happens everywhere. Now, sometimes I'll have a child that it can be loud and they need to focus. So they'll go to their bedrooms. We do have desks in each of the kids' bedrooms if they want to go and do some quiet work, and then they can do that. And some of them like to do that. Some of them are very social. They want to be out where everybody is. So it kind of gives that option to each of the kids, whatever their learning style is, to go where it's best for them. So it happens everywhere for us.
And I suppose my last question would be, how do you raise children who love to learn? What's your tip, your best tip for that?
I think just be an interesting person yourself. Your kids are becoming so much like you. And do you have hobbies? Do you read books? How do you spend your free time? Your kids are picking up on that. And are you a curious person? Are you, do you waste time just scrolling on your phone? Or are you being intentional? Are you being productive? And so be an interesting person, someone that they want to emulate, because they are learning so much from you.
Sheri, thank you so much for joining me today. I could go on and on, but thank you for your time. It's been really enlightening.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. I've really enjoyed it.
And thank you so much for joining Seatton Education today. Whether you watched us on YouTube or you listened as a podcast, please subscribe, like, and comment as we discuss how home education really can be an achievable alternative to conventional schooling. See you next time.